Hi everyone, my name is Mark Moikins from Big Mountain Studio. This is part 2 of the 4-part series on Supernova Studio. If you're a designer and you want to learn more about the best practices to prepare your design document to be used with Supernova Studio, then keep watching. As a designer, you know that it can take many shapes, layers, or elements to design one item on the UI. Luckily, you can put all these elements together into one group, and this will greatly assist Supernova Studio when it comes time to import. For example, the sign up button here is made up of 4 different elements. You'll want to group all these elements together to represent one button. So start thinking in terms of one group represents one control. This artboard here will have 3 groups to represent images and buttons. Here are just a couple of other examples where you might have UI controls made up of several different elements. And again, you want to make sure that these elements are grouped together to represent one control. Supernova Studio is pretty smart, and it will know how to convert all of these pieces into one control. Now, I think you get the idea on how those work. Let's move on to controls that are a little more complicated, starting with tables. The rows in a table are a single control, so this would be a single group. But then the table itself is also a single control, and this is made up of a group of rows. So in your design program, it might look something like this. You have a table group with row groups within it. Grids have the same concept. Each item or cell in a grid is one control, and all the items fall within one grid. The last items I want to talk about are the navigation bars and the tab bars. These also act as containers with other controls inside of them. So you can group them up like you see here, and that will greatly help once they're within Supernova Studio. Okay, you got plenty of examples here, but now let's head into Sketch and Supernova Studio and get our hands dirty. I'll be using a sketch file for this demonstration. Supernova has one that we can play with for their demo app called Spacebook. You can download it from the link shown here. The link is also in the video's description. Okay, I'm at Supernova's GitHub page where the link will take you to. And from here, what you want to do is just click on this clone or download button. We're going to download a zip. Okay, then we'll just click on that. It opens up the Finder. So then we could just explore within here. We want to look at tutorial data, sketch, and then we have the sketch document here. So let's open that up. Okay, and we're just going to explore some of these elements and see some of these best practices. Okay, now looking at this button here, you can see that it's in its own group. So this is the button, this is another button, and then this is the logo. And all these things are grouped up, so when you import them, you can easily identify this group as one button. And again, you can see the group consists of different design elements. Okay, so that's buttons, but we can also see other controls too. For example, we have a switch here, and this switch is also grouped up into a button. So Supernova Studio will know how to take these different elements here and create an actual mobile control that we can use. Okay, now we also talked about table views too. So here, this kind of looks like it might be a table view. Okay, let's actually see the whole thing here. Yeah, you can see it scrolls all the way down, and each one of these things might be rows in the table view. The first thing we want to do is we want to be able to tell which ones are rows and then what the whole table view is by grouping it together. So if we come here, we have this thing called timeline. And then these will make up the different rows in the timeline. So the timeline itself is the table, and these are individual rows inside the table. So not all the rows have to be exactly the same. You can have different styles for different rows. Just as long as you group them together, Supernova Studio will know how to handle it. And there's a different type of control too, like you see here. And this is what's known as a collection view in iOS. So we have one group that contains all of them, but then inside of it, we have separate groups to represent each cell or item inside of that collection. And in this case, this is something that can scroll horizontally. Then we see another example of a table. I can select the whole thing, and I have the whole table called messages here. And if we expand that, these are the individual rows inside of that table. Okay, now there's another control down here. And this is what's known as a tab bar. So it's named appropriately, a tab bar. And if I open it up, each of those items inside of it are separate controls inside of your mobile development platform. So a tab bar is kind of like a container, and then inside of it has items, and those items can have images and they can have text. And these items are just grouped together so Supernova can handle it more easily when you import them. And you might notice there's other things in here too, such as that line that separates the top here and a background. And Supernova is smart enough where it can take that information and maybe it'll borrow its color, but it'll remove those elements once we convert it into a tab bar. Now I want to spend just a minute on the topic of naming. And a lot of these things, you heard me say that this is a button, this is a tab bar, this is a table. But a lot of these things, they don't say table, and it doesn't say collection view. And I wouldn't recommend naming them what components they actually are. Because one, the components might be called differently within Android and iOS. And also, Supernova has the ability in their preferences to add the appropriate naming convention for you. You can use their default one. So for example, in iOS, this might be called Online Collection View once you export it to iOS. And it might be called something different for Android. And if you don't like Supernova's naming preferences, you can actually customize that and supply your own naming convention as well. So as a designer, I would just stick with a name as far as what it represents, and don't worry about the component that it will become. Okay, now let's go into Supernova Studio, and we're going to import this, and then you can see what it looks like once it's imported. Okay, I'll choose the Import from Sketch option, and I downloaded this, so it's going to be in my Downloads folder. And here it is right here. So let's open that. Okay, so Supernova Studio has some version requirements. So I have an updated version of Sketch. So all I have to do is just save this file. And then we can try to import it again into Supernova Studio. There we go. So when we import, we can actually select which artboards we want to import. We don't have to import all of them if we don't need them. So for example, I'm just going to pick these first 6. Okay, now let's inspect the actual elements that were imported. Now, as you can see here, this is what the group looks like. So it's just a view, which is kind of like a container, and it has a label inside of it and an image inside of it. But we actually want this to be a button, right? So all we have to do is just right click it and say convert to component, and then we select a button. And now notice it doesn't have those 3 elements anymore. It doesn't have the label, the image, and the outside view. It took all those things together and it made it into one button. And it could easily do that because they were all grouped together to begin with. So as a designer, it's very important and very helpful to remember this and group all those elements together that represent one mobile component. Okay, that's it for part 2. In part 3, we're going to dig deeper into Supernova Studio, and we're going to convert more of these design elements into mobile components. And then we're also going to set up some animation. We're going to set up some navigation, and then we'll actually look at exporting too. So keep watching.